The truck is so dirty. But that's okay, because I've got slugs and snails that like to eat. They get up here and eat this stuff. They leave trails. Look at the trails they leave. Isn't that cool? uh, anyway, I love the older vehicles. And I think part of the reason I love the older vehicles is because I'm older than this truck. When I was I don't know, 9, 10 years old, this truck was rolling off the line at the factory. I remember my grandfather having one of these old Chevy trucks. His was white, and it's like part of it was white and the other part was green, like a nice a nice. It's hard to describe the green color, but I love that green color. And I remember as a child driving around in that truck for my grandfather, and I love those old vehicles. Now I remember driving around, and I was able to ride in vehicles uh, when I was young, back before seatbelts were mandatory. A lot of cars and trucks did not have seatbelts, nor did they have air conditioning or all the niceties that we have today. And you know, the the vehicles that gave us all of our comforts that we have today, um, most of those are newer models. But back then we had what was called the 260 air conditioner. That's where you roll down your two windows and go 60 miles an hour down the road, and it would cool off. You know, the that's how you cooled off. But anyway, I just thought that today I would talk a little bit about why I love these older vehicles and my experience on working on some of the vehicles throughout my life. I haven't always had the time or the proper tools or the inclination to actually get out and do that kind of work, but there have been times when I have. And I had taken, can you see where I started washing it off? And I came out here in the rain and figured, hey, I'd just kind of scrub all that stuff off. But I was a teenager in the 70s, in the 1970s, and I was able to experience a lot of that culture and life here. Um, Now, of course, I live in the United States, and I live uh, I live in Tennessee. I'm a Tennessee boy. But anyway, when 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 you get on TV or Netflix or whatever, and you look up that '70s show, um, I lived through that. I lived through that era. I was a teenager during the '70s, and I had the lifestyle, I had the hairdo, the clothing style, everything. My friends, my family, everybody, we all went through the late the 60s and the 70s, and the automobiles and the cars and the culture and the lifestyle back then in the part of the country I was living in here in Tennessee. Um, when all the other people around were, you know, wanting to get their Chevelles and their Mustangs and their Novas and Camaros and Gran Torinos and all those, and fix them up and having their power, you know, big hot rod cars and stuff like that. My mind was on something else. My mind was on, and this is something that I always liked, and I always thought that I would love to have as a lifestyle. I loved dune buggies. The thought of having my own dune buggy was just great. You know, in the in in the early '70s, you know, I was like, man, someday I'm gonna get me a dune buggy. And then later on, I discovered Baja Bugs, which is a Volkswagen Beetle fixed up, you know, with knobby tires and you know, body modifications and a little bit of engine modification, and turned into like a vehicle, an all-terrain vehicle that you could get out and go in. And I was thrilled. Back then, I could get a magazine called JC Whitney. Well, it was a catalog. I could get a catalog called the JC Whitney catalog. And if I remember correctly, the way I found that was an ad in the back of some other magazine. Just some magazine that was sitting around somewhere. And I remember I would go to the back pages in the magazines back then, and I would look at all these little advertisements, because that's where all the cool stuff, the dreamy stuff, you know, different ads and things on flying car, you know, the futuristic flying car, right? This is during the '70s. Now I remember it was Mahler Enterprises advertised how they were working on their flying car. And I loved that idea. But that was futuristic Jetson stuff, right? That was Star Trek stuff, which I knew back then was not something that I would have. So I didn't focus on that. But man, I love those Baja Bugs. I love those little VW Beetle. And I wanted to make my own. I wanted that so much. But when you're a young teenager and you don't have any money, right? All you have is, you know, what you might happen to come across, or what your family, you know, allows you to utilize. But my father periodically would have projects that he would work on, and one of those projects was a Dodge van. And that Dodge van, he had brought home, and it needed work. And anyway, he would have me get out there and help him. Right? I'd help him find tools. He'd tell me which tool to get. I'd get in the toolbox and find it and bring it to him, and you know, just be his assistant, help him out, this and that. Well, he had me help him pull the engine out of that van, and we tore it down, and you know, we did all kinds of stuff to that engine, all the way down to the pistons and the valves. And I remember replacing bearings on the I forget what they were called at the time, but it was like the bearings that the crankshaft sits in and spins on. And that's when I learned about all the seals and, you know, the gaskets and stuff like that, and oil viscosity and things. But that made a big impression on me, and I was able to take my experience and my knowledge of helping him work on a couple of projects like that, to where I felt like I had the confidence to do that on my own. So as a teenager, you know, when I ended up being able to walk down the road, I would walk for a good ways, and I would go and I would work at a Shoney's restaurant. My first job, washing dishes, bussing tables. I washed dishes and bus tables like you wouldn't believe. I became so good at it. So good at it because I had a dream. My dream was I'm going to get me a Volkswagen Bug. And, well, I had two dreams. One dream was I was going to get me a hot rod car. But my dad and mom were like, no, you can't do that. You'll kill yourself. Right? So, but they both knew that I liked those little VW Bugs. So my dad going into Nashville, he would go into Nashville and work and, get out and about and do things. And he discovered a guy there in Nashville that had a 1967 VW Bug, $500. So I had saved up $500. That's all the money I had. And he says, hey, we're going to go get that VW Bug and we're going to bring it home. So I'll go downtown with him, and we go down there, and it's in a kind of a shady part of town. And this guy meets us there, and we look at this VW Bug, and my dad checks it out and says, yeah, this is great. We're going to get it, and we're going to take it home. Right. It needed body work. It needed engine work. It needed cleaned up just tremendously. So I took it home. My dad and I did. And, I started cleaning it up. And over time, I ended up doing the body work, painting it with a compressor and spray gun, rebuilding the engine and the transaxle, just totally taking everything apart, cleaning it up, replacing any bits and pieces that really needed replaced, fixing things that needed fixed. Got it to where it was running pretty good. And I would get out and I would use it, and I would go drive around. Well, I ordered parts and pieces from JC Whitney catalog. And today, the company known as carparts.com is actually used to be JC Whitney catalog, where today you can get online and you can go and you can find parts and pieces online and order those, get them delivered to your house or wherever you want them delivered, right? So that company is basically the same company as I had during the 1970s to be able to order pieces and parts. We ordered parts from JC Whitney catalog from my dad's Dodge van. I ordered parts from that catalog for my 1967 VW Bug that I rebuilt. And I also ended up with the fiberglass pieces and parts for rebuilding the body and turning it into a Baja Bug. But I never actually got around to doing that. I think those fiberglass pieces sat around for probably another, I don't know, maybe another 10 years around there. But I never got around to it. And the reason why is I was going down the road in my Volkswagen Bug, and my sister's walking down the road, right? And this is the road that we lived on. So I'm going down the road, and my sister's on the side of the road, so I slow down and stop to talk to her. And coming flying down the road behind me is one of my neighbors, a girl, a teenage girl, who has this really cool, nice Firebird. It's either Trans Am or Firebird, I forget which. And she's flying down the road, not paying attention, right? And everything in my car was operational. My brake lights were operational, everything. But she smacked in the back of my VW Bug. My VW Bug lurched forward, just kind of basically like shot down the road a little bit because she hit it so hard. My seat, the seat I was sitting in, the driver's seat, right, actually bent all the way back like that. And I remember, because the keys in the dashboard go straight in, right? They don't go in the column, right? They go straight into the dash. And I remember when that happened, watching that key come out of that keyhole and just slowly, is like when I was going backwards while my seat was breaking and bending backwards. I remember focusing on that key, how that key come out of there, and the two of us just slowly, in slow motion, just went backwards. And I remember that key flew past my face, and I remember hearing it smack in the back. I think it smacked the back window. So the VW bug just kind of like jumped all around and everything. Needless to say, it really did a lot of damage to her car and mine. I ended up parking it and everything. But I ended up joining the military and went away for, a long time. I was in the military for a good long time, 10 years. And, I never really got back to working on that VW bug. And my mother actually ended up with the title, and she donated it to a church. And it went over to that church, and it sat on that church lot for maybe another 2 or 3 years, until eventually the church sold it and took the money and used it for the church. But I loved going through the JC Whitney catalog, and I loved dreaming about fixing up another VW bug. I wanted to turn it into a Baja bug. And even today, I can remember I used to get a magazine called VW Bug or something like that. I think the squirrels are up in the tree. I don't remember exactly what the name of the magazine is. I may have one stashed away somewhere. I might need to look at those, see what I can find. But I remember during the 70s and the early 80s, that magazine, they're talking about the different Volkswagens and how they fixed them all up. And a lot of them were Volkswagen vans, like 60s and early and 70s models, Volkswagen vans and Volkswagen Beetles, and how they were fixed up really cool and neat. And that's something I've always wanted to do. So I might just go find me another Volkswagen Bug and order me a bunch of parts from carparts.com, which used to be JC Whitney's catalog. So that's why I like carparts.com. And I'd really love to be able to find one of those old JC Whitney's catalogs and just sit and browse through it again. Bring back some memories. But anyway, if I happen to get me another older, like 60s model VW Bug, that is going to be something I would just be thrilled about, and I would love to do that and finally actually making myself a Baja Bug. I might even be willing to sell this. No, I ain't gonna do that. I love this truck. This truck's gonna be another project that I work on and get going again. This truck used to be pretty. It was pretty when I had it. Oh well, talk to you later.